when I joined Pioneer. I joined Pioneer.
What was the nature of your work? What were your responsibilities at Pioneer Natural Resources?
Mr. Commissioner, I'm going to highlight that shortly now in the next paragraph or so.
Okay.
I joined Pioneer as a trainee petroleum engineer, and my training covered both disciplines of drilling engineer, which would be the engineer responsible for, or at least looking after the wells when we go drilling and making sure that the equipment is in place and the logs, once they've been logged, the interpretation thereof. It also included the part of being a reservoir engineer. So as a drilling engineer, my time was also spent offshore. I've spent time in the Gulf of Mexico. I've spent time about 100 kilometers south of Mossel Bay, so where you stand on a boat and you look all around, you don't see any land, but just water. So that was the time when we were drilling wells for together with Petro SA that were feeding into the Moss gas plant. So that was the training as a drilling engineer. As a reservoir engineer, my training included the auditing of reserves, understanding what makes reserves more economic, because sometimes you discover something and it's not sufficient for them to develop. And then so those estimations of pricing, estimations of reserves, and capital costs that go into the process, that was part of my job. I then spent most of my time as a reservoir engineer, and I was promoted at Pioneer to the point where I ended up looking after the gas producing assets in Texas, called the West Panhandle gas field. During 2008, I joined the business development team at Pioneer as the manager of economic analysis. And between 2008 and 2009, Mr. Commissioner, you may recall at that time oil prices were moving from $40 to $130. So there were a lot of potential acquisitions. We evaluated a lot of them, and that it was my primary responsibility to look at different investment proposals from different companies and screen them, and then eventually about 8 of them will go for final approval at board level. I subsequently decided to leave the US and Pioneer in June 2009 because of my desire to pursue a career as an investment analyst, and also a big desire to come back home because it had been a long time away from my family.
Mr. Chikudo,
yes.
Just a question here. Geologists, do they do oil drilling, or is just in the mining sector?
So they do participate in both areas, and in order for us to determine where the oil reserves might be, we need geologists. They will study the maps and try and understand the geological shifts that happened thousands or if not millions of years ago, and they will be the first people to study and then direct us as to where where you might find some oil reserves, and then exploration wells will be drilled, and hopefully we find something. Yeah. When I came back to South Africa, I then spent another 7 years as an investment analyst in the private sector, working for reputable institutions like Alan Gray, also some brief stint at Sasol and Stanlib Asset Management. I spent more than 4 years at Stanlib Asset Management as an investment analyst. And my responsibilities included researching South African listed equities in the resources sector, writing an investment report, and presenting the findings and investment recommendations to the portfolio managers. During the period from 2009 to July 2016, when I was working in the private sector, my coverage included all mining stocks, including Sasol, outside except for platinum and gold stocks, which one of my colleagues was covering at the time. In August of 2016, the PIC recruited me and hired me as a sector specialist looking at infrastructure and energy portfolio. This is within the recently formed Research and Project Development Division. And my area of responsibility then included providing the PIC with quality and relevant research that will allow for them to make informed investment decisions in the energy and infrastructure space. Again, the common aim for all of us was to improve the returns to the portfolio and also stimulate the growth of the economy. Also, part of my responsibility was to generate new knowledge and investable ideas, and also to help PIC to gain some IP in the sector.
Okay, if I may intervene there, could you just explain to the Commission how you were recruited by the PIC?
Okay. So in terms of my recruitment, there was a post advertised, which I then applied for, and I was alerted to the need of the skill set that I have, because one of the people that worked at PIC used to work with me at Stanlib, and they alerted me to the fact that they are looking for skills. I must look out for the advertisement when it comes out, and once it came out on the website, then I was able to apply and went through interviews and then eventually got the position.
Could you just mention the name of the person that alerted you to the position?
It was Mr. Sholto Dolamo, who was my supervisor at Stanlib.
Yes, you may proceed.
Okay. On 2.4.2, Mr. Commissioner, around the 20th of September 2017, I was appointed as the acting fund principal, now looking only on the energy sector. This was a move away from research and project development team to join the Isibaya team, at impact investing team. Subsequent to another interview process in around June of 2018, I was promoted and given the same position on a permanent basis. That is the position that I currently serve in at the moment. So right now my focus is 100% on energy in the unlisted sector. Mr. Commissioner, I was asked to talk about Aron Energy, and my first introduction to Aron Energy. I thought I should give the Commission a snapshot of where Aron Energy came from and where it is the status today. Aron Energy used to be called Kamek Energy. It is engaged in the exploration, development, and production of oil and gas assets. This is a very similar job to what I was doing at Pioneer Natural Resources. The company owned and operated the OML 120 production license offshore Nigeria. This license is also called the oil field in short. It is located 70 kilometers from the coast of Nigeria, where water depth ranges from 300 to 450 meters. The reservoir was discovered about 1.7 kilometers below the sea floor. So there is not much that we can go and see. It's not unlike in a mine where we can go and see the actual coal reserves. We can't do that with oil fields. Oil field is surrounded by much larger oil discoveries, such as the Era, which is owned by ExxonMobil, and Bonga, which is owned by Shell. However, these larger discoveries, Mr. Commissioner, are not found at the same depth, which means that those bigger ones were found in the Miocene formation, which is much deeper, and it's also geologically, it is much older. So geologists talk about geological age, talking about the movement from ice age, the warming of the earth, and then the tectonic shifts that happened. The oil fields.
Yes. Yeah. Are these based in sort of in that area where there is fighting? What is it called, by the way?
So in this case, no. So the area you're talking about, the delta,
The
the
delta.
Niger Delta.
Yes, yes.
The water depth is a bit more shallower, so it might be less than, it's most probably less than 50 meters deep in most of those cases. That's where people without the proper equipment will go and try and, or terrorists will try and go and invade.
Yeah.
But in the deeper water, there is less disruptions.
Yeah, no, what I wanted to check is this the place where Ken Saro-Wiwa was actually based and all that? Do you know?
No, I don't know.
Okay, all right. I don't sort of remember the name, it's fine.
So the oil reservoir was discovered in the shallower Pliocene formation, Mr. Commissioner. And in spite of the drilling campaigns, which included Oyo 7, Oyo 8, Oyo 9, and 5 and 6, which were drilled earlier when ENI was still a partner in the field, this field has failed to create value for shareholders. The company filed for bankruptcy protection in April of last year, and the last news clip that I saw this year, about a month ago, said that the government had taken over the license.
Nigerian government.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, you know, question here, I'm sure you'll come to it, but was this company in production?
There was production,
Yeah.
and it was very small. But then the oil, I think it was either Oyo 8 or 7, one of them was producing at about 5,000.
Barrels
Yes, per day.
yeah. Mhm.
And then the next other well was at 1,000, and that was it.
Okay, quite small, eh?
Yes.
Okay.
So my first introduction to Aron Energy, or at that point it was called Carmack Energy, was at Stanlib. It was around 2013 when my supervisor at that time, who was leading the analyst team in the resources sector, that supervisor was Mr. Sholto Dolamo. He requested me to join him in a meeting. It was not my meeting, it was his meeting, but he then came and called me to join him in a meeting with Aron Energy.
Can I ask you this question? Apart from Mr. Sholto Dolamo, who else was in that meeting?
This I cannot say with certainty, but I will bet that Mr. Kobas was also in the meeting because he was a senior position in the resources sector than I was at the time.
Was there anyone from Aron?
There was at least Dr. Case Lawal. He was the one making the presentation on Aron Energy. Aron Energy had embarked on a roadshow in order to raise funding through a listing of the shares on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Aron Energy planned to drill Oyo 7 and Oyo 8 wells with the funds raised. Oyo 7 and 8 were expected to raise Aron's production by up to 14,000 barrels per day. The secondary objective for Oyo 7 was to explore for the deeper hydrocarbon-bearing interval, which would be in the Miocene area, similar to what the other fields, the Exxon or Shell fields, were producing from.
At that point, do you remember what the amount that Aron wanted to raise was?
I don't know the amount, yeah.
Just tell me, so Oyo, 7, that production which you mentioned, which area was it? Which oil was there? Some Oyo 6 or something? The 5,000 barrels and the 1,000 barrels.
So,
but if you're gonna cover it, it's fine. I mean.
No, it is in one of the reports.
Okay.
I think so if I may refer you to Annexure B and page 5 of Annexure B. At the bottom, I show a chart which shows the oil production total coming from the field. So there are two separate charts, and at the bottom, okay. So Annexure B, page 5 at the bottom. Yeah. So the first half of the chart shows production from Oyo 5 and Oyo 6. Those were the wells that were drilled by ENI and Allied Energy or Carmack Energy. can see, Mr. Commissioner, that by June of 2014, those wells were producing barely 1,000 barrels per day, and then they were shut in at that point in time. Then it was during that time, just before June 2014, between July 2013 and June 2014, when Aron came and they wanted to raise funding. And the idea was for them to drill Oyo 7 and Oyo 8, which will then lift the production by 14,000 barrels per day from the current 1,000, by the then current 1,000 per day.
But that is an estimate there, that's
That
not
was an
actual
estimate.
numbers. So
Correct.
the actual numbers go to June 14, and then from May 15 to Feb 17, those are estimates.
Those are actuals. Everything in this
Is
chart is now
actual.
actuals.
So
Now
7
this
and
is
8
looking back, yes.
Okay, so 7 and 8, you then came up to 14,000 barrels, but by February it was back to zero.
Yes, correct.
Right. Okay.
So the 14,000 was indeed attained, but just for a very short space of time. Okay. On 4.3, based on my recollection of that meeting in 2013, unfortunately, Mr. Commissioner, this was at Stanlip and I did not have my notes, so I had to rely on my memory and what I can find on the press releases. From what I can remember, I was not confident of their production forecast. We've just talked about the production from Oyo 5 and 6, which declined quite quickly to the point where in 2013 it was about 1,000 barrels per day. I was not confident that the new wells will be able to maintain that production rate. My reasons were that the decline rates that we saw were too quick, which means that the reserves that are in place may be much smaller than what we thought. And it was during that meeting that one starts to interrogate management, which was in this case Mr. Case Lawal, to say how are we able to get 14,000 and a shallower decline or better production rate. And when I inquired more and also about the capital requirements, he seemed to deflect some of the questions and try to move on. So that did not give me much confidence about what was about the investment case that he was proposing. I was also skeptical that Aron will be able to develop and find reserves in the deeper Miocene formation. My rationale was that ENI, which was the 40% holder of the license, was the partner previously. And ENI would have been under pressure to explore, or at least to do the geological modeling first, to understand if there is anything or any potential in the deeper Miocene reserves, especially when one considers that their biggest competition, which is Exxon and Shell, have big production just a few kilometers on either side.
Let's check something here. So the company was producing something, but was that production sort of profitable, or was there some cash flow? Because at some point in time you say they filed for bankruptcy. So
Yes.
I just want to understand that.
Mr. Commissioner, at that point in time, it was able to continue to sustain itself, but there was a lot of internal debt, which, well, interrelated party debt, which was not getting serviced. A lot of accounts payables which were not getting serviced either at that point in time. So, but in terms of the cost, when we look at oil and gas industry, the biggest cost item is the capital outlay that comes up front. The actual running costs are quite low, and the problem is that now, when you start to bring in the financing part, that's where they were struggling. They were not able to service that fully. Okay. After the meeting, I discussed my concerns with my supervisor and indicated that I was not comfortable with the investment case. We did not have enough information, and we agreed to not pursue that opportunity at that time. And we would reassess our views once more information came out to the market, simply because I felt that some of my questions were not getting addressed, and we thought maybe when more information comes to the market, there'll be more information for us to assess. the investment. In 4.5, I also understand, Mr. Commissioner, that Aron also approached the PIC during that roadshow process, asking for funding, and eventually PIC acquired a 29% equity interest in Aron for about $270 million for the purposes of funding the Oyo 7 and Oyo 8 wells.
It was also then in 2013.
From what I've seen in the reports, it's 2014.
2014.
The funds, yeah, eventually flowed in 2014. So that marked the end of my involvement with Aron at Stanlib, and then I moved over in 2016 to PIC.
When you were at Stanlib and then the PIC funded this company, what were you guys thinking at, at Stanlib?
Mr. Commissioner, when we look at resource stocks, there are the essential things one has to bear in mind. It's commodity prices, the reserves, knowing that they will be declining, and also the geological risk. And at that point in time, we had seen oil prices skyrocket to $245 per barrel in 2008, and then only for them to collapse 6 months later to below 30. So the view was, if one has an aggressive view on oil pricing, then almost anything, in any size of reserves, it's profitable at that point in time. We stuck to our analysis of the oil market, which I was responsible for at Stanlib, to understand what is the long-term oil pricing. And at some point we thought 90 might be the high point, and then eventually we went down to 70 as the long-term real oil price. So we did not see prices going back to 150, which possibly that's what PIC might have seen at that time.
I see. So the PIC took a different view in terms of the price to you guys, basically.
Correct.
Sort of $70 versus 150.
Correct. I think that might
Could
that's
have
probably
been.
that could have
Could
been,
have been that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay. May I ask you this question? Before the PIC took a decision to invest in Aron, what steps would you have expected them to take before?
Mr. Commissioner, this is a highly specialized field. Well, maybe that's the wrong way to put it, but in South Africa, I can say when I was growing up, I never thought about where oil comes from. But coal, one understands because we have a lot of coal mines, we're exposed to that. So in a case where we are looking at an investment case, which is not something that's common, I think it is good to have people who are highly qualified in the area and who know and understand the risks that are there in the industry. Having said that, Mr. Commissioner, I'd like to pause to say this is in no way a judgment of the skills that was there at PIC. I don't know all the people who were working on this at that time and their qualifications, but as a requirement for one to invest in this area, especially when it's not a common industry in the country, it is important to have people that understand, that have been inside the industry or that have looked at it for a long time. On Section 5, Mr. Commissioner, we talk about the Aron transaction at PIC. My understanding is that before I joined the PIC in August 2016, Aron Energy had approached the PIC with a request for financial support in the form of a bank guarantee. This is now in addition to the other 270 that was spent in 2014. This would allow Aron Energy to raise more capital to fund its growth strategy. The PIC was requested to provide a guarantee of $100 million. Aron had been in the process of negotiating the loan facility with Mauritius Commercial Bank, and as far as I'm aware, that loan negotiation with MCB also took place before I joined the PIC.
May I ask you this question? In your view, would the $100 million have been sufficient to enable Aron to carry out its operations?
Mr. Commissioner, as the analysis that I was eventually able to do on this company, this was not sufficient. There was still a big hole to be plugged in at a later point in time. In the earlier statement, Mr. Commissioner, there was an issue that was raised about the debt that Aron had. Management, I think maybe it's worth bringing it now, that management had relied in their forecast that relied on the forbearance of creditors up to 400 million, which was made out from inter-party related loans, accounts that were payable to the likes of, to the service providers such as Halliburton and others, and also other long-term debt to Zenith Bank, which were not getting serviced. Management had relied on the fact that they might be able to negotiate their way out of that, but even with that, the funding was not sufficient.
Okay. What is your view on a pension fund? You said the sector, there is risk involved and it's high. What is your view on a pension fund investing in the oil and gas sector?
Mr. Commissioner, so as pension funds, they also have different mandates and they will have some appetite for high risk investments. And I would consider investment in oil and gas to be also on the risky side, similar to other mining commodities. And my experience in looking at the company that I used to work for, there are some pension funds that are invested, but what happens typically is that their exposure is quite limited and it is diversified across a broader portfolio. They will not have exposure to just one company, and they will not be funding the asset or the development alone either. It's also something that happens within the industry that when people have found a big discovery, similar to what we've had recently, that Total discovered something offshore South Africa. If you look at that, Total did not go on it alone. They brought in other partners. That's one other way that the industry diversifies some of the risk that is in there, that you will be able to fund different prospects, and the chance of success in exploration is usually less than 20%. So that's why they diversify. So it is fine for a pension fund to invest, but I think be diversified.
Yeah. Are you saying success rates are about 20%?
In exploration, pure
In that
exploration.
area, in that, yeah. Tell me, was this project or the funding for this project, were they in the drilling stage or were they in bank feasibility? Where was this funding going to be used for?
So, Mr. Commissioner, so because of the production that was there from Oyo 5 and 6, which are not far, one was able to rely on the geological models and say, okay, they are bankable. And so the money, the 270 million, all of it should have gone to the drilling of the wells.
Because 5 and 6 were contiguous.
Correct.
To 7 and 8.
Correct.
Yes, okay. And then was this company listed by now on the stock market?
It was listed in New York. I don't remember the date that it was listed in New York. Yeah.
And the 29% that the PIC bought for 270 million, was it bought when it was listed or before listing at the IPO stage?
Mr. Commissioner, at the time, Mr. Chikodo had not yet joined the PIC.
But then, so that that stake, was this part of a listed company stake? Maybe to ask the question then that way.
Mr. Commissioner, I wouldn't know for sure the facts, exactly when the funds flowed.
Yeah.
I know eventually they wanted to list on the JSE, and how that transaction went between PIC and the listing, I don't know.
Yes, it could have been a secondary listing on the JSE,
Correct.
given that maybe they were on the New York Stock Exchange.
Correct.
Yes, Mr. Commissioner, if I may assist, the CAMAG, which later became Aron, did list on the JSE.
I can remember, yeah, okay.
Around January 2017, I was made aware, this was barely 4 months or 5 months after I joined PIC, I was made aware of a planned technical workshop with Aron Energy in Houston by my manager, Mr. Dolamo. He was the executive head of research and project development, and which is the division I was employed in as a sector specialist. He requested me to conduct an independent review of the investment thesis, review the probability of the PIC earning a return on the investment, and advise on the next steps for the PIC to take. I think 5.2.2 we've talked about, where we look at commodity pricing. I think we've raised that. So that workshop was held at Aron Energy offices in Houston, Texas on the 27th and the 28th of March 2017.
Okay, if I may intervene there, who accompanied you on the trip?
From PIC, Mr. Fidelis Madavo was leading the group, and it was myself and Ms. Robina Solomons, who's the executive head for portfolio for PMV. And we were also joined at the workshop by the PIC's technical experts, which was Secoil and Petrovision. From Aron's side, they had all their executive management and geologists, so probably a team of 10 people that were coming from Aron's side. Okay. On the 10th of March, just before the trip to Houston, I requested and I was given documents that shed some light on the history of the transaction at PIC. The documents included the resolution from the investment committee, which indicated that, among others, in June of 2016, the investment committee had considered and approved for PIC to provide a guarantee for the $100 million loan funding, which Aron was requesting from MCB, which is the Mauritius Commercial Bank. So PIC investment committee had approved for PIC to provide that guarantee. However, as a precondition for the guarantee, amongst others, the PIC was to ensure that it appointed an independent technical expert who will monitor certain milestones and the process envisaged under the disbursement process, which included the review and approval of invoices. I have attached a copy of the resolution of the investment committee as Annexure A, and I think, we've highlighted most of the important points. In compliance with that resolution of investment committee, the PIC hired the services of Secoil and Petrovision to serve as PIC's independent technical experts. I was not involved, Mr. Commissioner, in the process of hiring Secoil and Petrovision. I am not fully aware of the timing when those appointments became effective or the terms of reference of those appointments. My first interaction with both parties or the technical experts was when we met at Aron offices during the technical workshop on the 27th.
If I may ask you, you say the PIC appointed Secoil and Petrovision, that is two service providers. What is your view on, or what was the role of each of them, and what is your view on two service providers being appointed instead of one?
Mr. Commissioner, I was not part of the appointment process, as I've said, but in terms of the work that was being done, both Petrovision and Secoil were effectively doing the same job together. So we will get the reviewed invoices from Secoil and with comments from Petrovision. I do not understand why there had to be two appointments, and I do not know if the agreement was with Secoil or with Petrovision, but I don't see the reason for not having one only.
Mr. Commissioner, may I indicate at this point that the agreement was with Secoil, and we will place the agreement before the commission when one of the witnesses come to testify.
On 5.4.1, Mr. Commissioner, I highlight a lot of the technical things that we covered, the topics, and I think instead of reading them all out, but those are more for the engineers who want to review this. On 5.4.2, based on the information that we gathered at the workshop, I was able to compile a report and assess the investment case and make a recommendation to PIC management in line with the instruction that I was given by my manager. The process of compiling the report, considering inputs from my colleagues in research, and also finalizing the same report occurred between March 2017 and April of 2017. So as soon as we returned, and I think on the 19th of April, it was completed. I have attached the copy of the full report as it was originally submitted to relevant parties as Annexure B. We've already referred to it a few minutes ago.
Just a question is that, are you going to touch on it? Because I see you got some interesting stuff on the executive summary. Are you going to talk about it later, or you want to summarize some of the key aspects on the summary?
Correct, Mr. Commissioner, and I think 5.4.3 will highlight all the main points from that report.
All right.
The findings of my report were as follows. First of all, Aron Energy was insolvent, and it required capital injections to remain a going concern. I have already highlighted the fact that management was hoping that they will negotiate away about $400 million of debt, either through long-term debt or accounts payable, which they were not able to service. But even with that, they still needed capital injection. The analysis was to look at what happens if Oyo 9 was successful, because the $100 million guarantee was to back the drilling of Oyo 9. Will a successful drilling campaign of Oyo 9 result in Aron having sizable cash and being able to continue as a going concern, was the question that I had to address. My analysis showed that even if I adopt what management's forecast that they will receive debt forgiveness, and the fact that related parties will not call on the loans or the accounts payable, Aron still needed at least $68 million of cash before 2021. This was an analysis which actually we were able to get to by just drilling deeper into management forecast, and they knew that, they understood that too. In my report, I went through other different assumptions again to come to the same conclusion and shown the sensitivity to changes in oil pricing, and that's where we have a big table. But in short, the conclusion was that Aron still needed at least $68 million of cash injection within the next 3 to 4 years. The issue of debt forgiveness, of the forbearance of trade creditors, we could not test that. Management was adamant that they are busy with the negotiations and they are confident that they will be able to get that. And if they did not succeed, then it meant that the cash injection that was needed was more than $470 million, not the $68 million that I talked about earlier. The other part which comes in to, at least for my interest, was in terms of reservoir management. It was tricky, and Mr. Commissioner, if I may explain this in a bit more detail, is that we've shown you Oyo 5 and Oyo 6 production, which declined quite quickly, and that was not comforting for somebody who's been a reservoir engineer for some time. But then when they produced Oyo 7 and Oyo 8, we saw production of water in one case and production of gas in the other case. And in any time that you are producing oil, if you have water or gas intrusion into the wellbore, they will basically choke off the oil, which is the more valuable part that you want. So you always want to manage and limit how much gas or how much water is produced through that reservoir, especially in a case where the gas was getting flared or the water has no value when you are offshore. Even so, the only thing that's valuable is the oil at that point in time. And good reservoir management seeks to limit the flow of water and gas into the well. The other part was that management was hoping to create some value through the exploration portfolio. And I think it was in Gambia, I'll need to check again, but where they had managed to bring in another party, but at the same time, Aron was diluted from being 100% owner to a minority owner, and the cash injection that came in was only about $5 million at that point in time. So they were hoping that they can develop the exploration, but you need funds for one to develop that exploration and make it more attractive and get more payment in return. In view of the whole...
Mr. Chikudu, sorry, I think it would be best for record purposes to just mention when you go to the next paragraph that I'm now going to deal with paragraph so-and-so, because you, as I noticed, you don't keep to the wording of the statement, correct?
Correct. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Mr. Commissioner. Will do. In terms of if we look at 5.4.4, this was the overall conclusion of my report, which again is in Annex B. The conclusion was that PIC was unlikely to earn a meaningful return on investment, and consequently, the recommendation was for PIC to not proceed with the provision of the guarantee and for PIC to exit the Aron Energy Equity Investment totally. That report was emailed to my manager, who had already reviewed it before, but Mr. Sholto Dolamu, it was emailed to him, to Mr. Fidelis Madavo, who was the executive head of listed investments, and also to his team the day after. Also copied on the email was Ms. Rubina Solomon, executive head of investment management, who had also accompanied us to the technical workshop. I have attached in 5.4.6, in Annex C, you can see the email correspondence with the team where the report was sent out. This happened on the 19th of April, 2017. I pause, Mr. Commissioner, in 5.4.7 to highlight that I did have a verbal discussion of my findings with my manager. He had reviewed the report and we discussed it, and he said he was going to discuss the report with the CEO, who was then Dr. Daniel Machila. I do not know whether that report was sent to Dr. Machila or whether this discussion did take place. But me and my manager, we did have that discussion.
So what you're saying is that your manager did not come back to you regarding the discussion that he said he was going to have with Dr. Machila?
Correct. So the report was emailed on the 19th of April to the team. And then in 5.4.8, Mr. Commissioner, I highlight the fact that on the 2nd of May 2017, I made a follow-up on the report with the rest of the PIC team and also copying my manager. That correspondence is attached as Annexure D. However, there was no formal feedback from my colleagues specifically on the query relating to the report, and no further input from the team as to any other analysis that they may require. On the 3rd of May, being one day after my query, I, together with other members of the team, of the PIC team, working on the Aron transaction, we received invoices from Secoil, who was one of the independent technical advisors. I have attached a copy of that email from Secoil as Annexure E. When we received the email, to me it served as confirmation that the PIC had proceeded with offering the guarantee for Aron's loan. Remember the day before I was inquiring about any feedback on my report, which the report recommended that PIC must exit, and we didn't have any other discussion after that. But now on the 3rd of May, when I received the email, it just confirmed to me that, okay, PIC at some point in time had proceeded with the guarantee, and they are giving that guarantee for the MCB loan. I further gathered that subsequent to the submission of my report, there were other activities relating to the project, which I was not involved in, and neither was I copied on, including in relation to the process leading to the approval of the guarantee. So I don't know what timing, when that guarantee was approved finally.
May I just request to go to Annexure C to your statement?
Yes.
You received an email from Mr. Madavo at 2 on the 19th of April.
Correct.
And that was before you sent the report to them.
Yes.
Could you just read into the record what Mr. Madavo said in this email?
Okay. Mr. Commissioner, this will be Annexure C, right at the bottom. It's an email from Mr. Fidelis Madavo, received on the 19th of April. It said, Jeff, I take it that we have now finalized this report following the visit. I would appreciate you sharing an open discussion of your findings or conclusions before submission to the CEO.
So, despite Mr. Madavo requesting you to have an open discussion with him on your findings or conclusions before submission to the CEO, he never had a discussion with you.
Correct. That discussion never happened. So the report was sent to him, as Mr. Commissioner, you can see above that line. That was my response to Mr. Fidelis at just a few minutes after 4. Where I said, good day, Fidelis and Robina. Good timing, Fidelis. I had planned to send you and Robina the file today. Please see attachment. Please let me know if you wish for me to add anything else to the report. And since then, there was no discussion. So on 5.4.10, in terms of the arrangement made between Aron, PIC, Mauritius Commercial Bank, all the drawdowns by Aron in respect of the MCB funding, for which the PIC had provided a guarantee, had to be approved by the PIC as well. The procedure required Aron Energy to submit invoices to Secoil and Petrovision for sign-off. Where Secoil and Petrovision were satisfied with the invoices, they would forward the same to PIC for approval and sign-off. And where disagreements arose, Secoil or Petrovision would indicate to PIC that we should not sign off on this specific invoice. Once PIC has given the sign-off, our operations team will then issue an instruction to MCB for them to release the funds. Thus, the purpose of the SECOIL email, which I received on the 3rd of May, was to request the PIC team to sign off on the invoices. And I was then requested by my manager, Mr. Sholto Dolamo, who was the executive head of research and project development, to review the invoices as and when they are received.
Okay. You say at the end of paragraph 5.4.9 that there were further activities relating to the Aron project that you were not involved in or copied on, including in relation to the processes leading to the approval of the guarantee. If an agreement had already been reached between the parties, would it have been necessary for you to go or to attend the workshop?
Mr. Commissioner, my instructions when we went to the workshop was to independently review the investment case and assess the probability of PIC earning a decent return and getting the money back. And my understanding at that point in time was that there was still some room for management to decide either way, whether to go ahead with the guarantee or not. The fact that our investment committee had given an approval in June of 2016 was a PIC internal process, but as far as I understood at that point in time, or my view was that the funding agreements were not signed with Aron, but it was only internal approval that was received within PIC, but they had not yet executed anything that will oblige PIC to continue.
But if the agreement had been concluded, would it have been necessary for you to attend the workshop?
If that agreement had been concluded, Mr. Commissioner, then the instruction that I was given would not have been that useful at all. And therefore, unless if PIC wanted to understand more on the technical side, but it wouldn't have been useful for me to go.
Yes, you may proceed at paragraph 6.1.
Okay. 6.1, the PIC was resolute that the loan funding secured from MCB on the back of the PIC guarantee should not be used to fund expenses outside of those related to drilling of the Oyo 9 well. A reporting template was drafted and agreed to by the PIC, our external experts, SECOIL and Petrovision, and Aron Energy.
Okay, if I may stop you there, was there ever a time when Aron wanted to use the funds secured as a result of the guarantee for anything other than the drilling of Oyo 9?
My perception of the view inside PIC was that we could not fully trust that the funds would be deployed to just the drilling of Oyo 9, and that's why the investment committee had asked for an independent technical expert to monitor the delivery of certain milestones and make sure that payments were directed to the drilling of the well.
Okay. The invoices that were submitted to the PIC, did they relate only to the purpose for which the guarantee was given?
All the invoices that I reviewed, which were also prior to my review, were reviewed by Petrovision and SECOIL. They did relate to the drilling of Oyo 9.
Okay, you may proceed at 6.2.
6.2.1, Mr. Commissioner, Aron Energy had compiled a capital budget for the drilling of Oyo 9. The budget, which in the industry terminology is called Authority for Expenditure or AFE, was considered and at the technical workshop held in Houston. The quantum of the PIC guarantee was based on the amount required for the drilling of that well. The table below shows the total approval, which was $89 million that was required for the Oyo 9 well. I'm looking at the line at the bottom there, which is the summation of all the items above. So on the second column, so 88,965,000, that was the amount that was required for the well. However, I would like to highlight, Mr. Commissioner, that there were long lead items which were already, that Aron had already paid for, and they had them in stock, and that amounted to a value of 11.4 million. And new items that needed to be purchased amounted to $77.5 million. At the workshop, neither the PIC, which was essentially myself relying a lot on my previous experience, nor the PIC's technical experts could find any cost item that was outside of the range of industry expectations. It is true that, Mr. Commissioner, it is a leasing business and rates do differ year by year, but there is an industry standard where one expects prices to be, and we did not find anything that was outside of that range. Further, during the technical workshop, Aron Energy stated that they had entered into an equipment leasing contract with the Pacific Bora drilling ship. The drill ship was a 6th grade generation, which meant it is modern technology that we were going to use, so we were not using an ancient drill ship. And it had a good 10-year operational history in Nigeria. The rig was expected to arrive on location mid-June of 2017 after it had completed the drilling program at a third party's asset. 6.2.3, additionally, some items that had a long procurement lead time were sourced from Aron's inventory. As explained by management, this was done to ensure drilling operations commence as soon as the drill ship was available. I pause to highlight that the long lead items were included in the AFE, which we have already highlighted in the table above, and that is the $11,465,095. On 6.3, which is titled The Review of Invoices During Drilling Operations. As mentioned above, the first batch of invoices were received on the 3rd of May 2017 from SEC Oil. At PIC, I reviewed the invoices on behalf of the Executive Head, Research and Project Development. My reviews agreed with the recommendations of SEC Oil and Petrovision on payment of invoices. I found the approved invoices to be in line with the approved AFE, which we've already seen the table in the previous page. The Executive Head, Research and Project Development will then sign off on the payment approval memo after discussing the same with me. He relied on my review of the invoices for him to give his approval. I have attached samples of the emails containing my recommendations to my manager, Mr. Dolamo, and also to the Operations Investment Support Manager, Mr. Silongwan, where I gave my approval of the invoices. This is all included in Annexure F, and I think I've included about 3 of those approvals. Based on the recommendations from our division in Research and Project Development, as well as other relevant divisions, the operations team, led by Mr. Nkwane, will then be responsible for processing a payment approval memo and issuing a payment instruction to Mauritius Commercial Bank. Between May and December of 2017, I considered 11 batches of invoices. The last batch of invoice that I recommended for approval was batch 10, which was submitted on the 3rd of October 2017. I pause to highlight that despite me having been appointed as an acting fund principal in September of 2017 in the unlisted investment section, I continued to execute my role as a sector specialist, research and project development, and being the capacity under which I considered the invoices. The main aim was for me to complete some of the outstanding work and before fully moving over to the unlisted investments division. Prior to the submission of batch 11, which never got a chance to review, the PIC had taken a view that we should not approve further invoices until such a time that Aron Energy addresses certain concerns that PIC had in relation to, amongst others, the spending on the project and submission of reports to the PIC. As a result, and to the best of my knowledge, batch 11 was never approved. Batch number 10 was, which I did give my approval for. I believe only partial payment was made on that one and at a much later date. On 6.3.7, Mr. Commissioner, it is my understanding that following the decision not to approve batch 11, the PIC sought to have a meeting with Aron Energy during the first quarter of 2018. As far as I'm aware, this meeting did not take place, and unfortunately, in terms of my involvement with Aron, that marked the end of my involvement in the transaction. As mentioned above, during July 2018, I was appointed on a permanent basis in the position of Fund Principal, Energy in Impact Investing in the unlisted side of the business. And this division was not involved in the transaction since then.
Okay. Are you aware of the dispute between Aron Energy, or not Aron Energy, Allied and CAMAC Nigeria and AGIP regarding the ownership of OML 120 and OML 121?
Yes. Mr. Commissioner, from what I understood, it was based on news clips that we could find that during 2018, AGIP, which is ENI, which used to be a 40% shareholder in the asset, had won a case in a UK court which gave them ownership right to the whole of the license. And so there was that dispute. But all I saw was just the news clips.
Mr. Commissioner, the court that issued the award in favor of AGIP or its Italian holding company was the London Court of International Arbitration. Are you aware also that the dispute related to the fact that CAMAC Nigeria and Allied had not yet paid the entire purchase price for AGIP's interest in OML 120 and 121?
Mr. Commissioner, I was not aware of the details of the dispute. What I understood was that ENI was a 40% equity holder in the license, and the outstanding loans, we were not aware of the details.
What is your impression on this investment by the PIC?
Mr. Commissioner, having seen this investment in 2013 and being able to make a quick decision at that point in time to say, no, let's walk away, let's not invest in it now. My views on the investment have not changed, and the events that have transpired since then have actually proved that that decision that I made at Stanley was a good decision. It is not one we should be putting money in.
So,
sorry, just let me understand, what is a good decision?
I'm saying the good decision was telling my boss, let's not invest in this asset.
So the investment by the PIC was a bad one from the beginning.
I believe so.
Can I ask what the current status is? Because that is then the actual investment, which is over $400 million, and a guarantee of $100 million. What is the status of the PIC in relation to those investments? Are they written off? Are they subject to some other process? Where do we stand with that?
Mr. Commissioner, in terms of PIC's recording of the investment, initially it was 270 million, which was the acquisition of the 29% equity, and then the loan guarantee of $100 million.
370 or 200?
270.
It was $270 million initially, plus the 100,
Correct.
right?
Yeah,
So
and
that's 370 plus expenses.
the only other counter on that, Madam Commissioner, is that we don't know exactly how much was withdrawn from the 100 million guarantee, because at some point PIC stopped approving invoices and the work stopped. In terms of where it stands, in terms of, on PIC's books, will not be able to state because I don't know. It is an investment in the listed side of the business, and my focus has been on the unlisted side, so I don't know how they record it, whether they've written it off or if it's still on the books at the moment.
Yes, but still, if you look at, say, sort of 370, million dollars, even at 10 rands to the dollar, this is like 3.7 billion rands. You know, and at 12 rands to the dollar is like close to 4 billion rands. You know, so it's quite a large amount.
Mr. Commissioner, you are correct. It is a large amount. I was more referring to the process, whether PIC has already written this off or not, I don't know. But in terms of what should happen, because if, as I've mentioned before, the government has taken over the license, which means that the value that we see in this asset, unless if there was some oil in the FPSO, it would be much smaller than the 3 to 4 billion that you've referred to. It would be very small.
The license, which license has the government taken?
So what happens, Mr. Commissioner, is that...
And why?
Okay.
You know, yeah. Yes.
What happens, Mr. Commissioner, is that one will apply to government for a license, which then eventually gets converted into a production license. The oil field was a license called OML 120. And it was being operated by Aron Energy, and PIC was a partner in that ownership. It is that same license, which means that once that license is withdrawn, it is illegal for anyone to go and produce any of the wells or to drill or to do anything in that field. And at some point in time, the government might auction it to another party, who will then take ownership, and they start over again, the process.
Okay, so it's for both, for all like OYO 5 and 6, OYO
Correct.
7 and 8, 9, okay.
All the oil
so
wells,
all,
yeah.
it covers all the wells.
Correct.
Basically, okay.
Yeah.
And why did the government take it, by the way, sorry?
Mr. Commissioner, so during production, Aron was supposed to pay its part of royalties and taxes to the Nigerian government, and it is something that they've been failing to do. And also perhaps the lack of activity to justify allowing Aron to continue to own the license meant that there's no activity, and we have all these outstanding taxes that are overdue, and eventually the government exercised its right to take over the license.
Did the PIC have anybody on the board of this company?
Yes, Mr. Commissioner, Ms. Dudu Shotwayo, who's a board member of PIC, was also on the board of Aron Energy.
Do you know if the PIC was aware that the license could be in danger because of the non-payment of the taxes and the royalties? as we know, like Nigerian companies, that country is very tough on these issues.
Mr. Commissioner, I will not know. This is something more recent which we saw about a month ago, and it probably would have been, there would have been some discussions a few months before that, but at that point in time, my focus was elsewhere.
Mr. Commissioner, if I may assist, I would say that the PIC knew that the license would be in danger. There are documents that show that the PIC was aware of the litigation between CAMAC Nigeria, Allied, and AGIP. And there were letters from Dr. Den Machila raising those issues. And we will place those letters before the Commission in the future. And there is also a document that shows that clearly shows that Aron owed taxes to the Nigerian government. We will also try to place those documents before the Commission.
Can I ask a question? So, did you want to say something?
And if I may also assist Commissioner regarding board representation, Dr. Machila was the first official of the PIC to be on Aron's board. Ms. Dudu Hlosayo came in after Dr. Machila resigned.
Can I ask a couple of questions, and perhaps it's not as much for you as for the PIC team, the investigation team. The question of what happened to the PIC's 29% stake in this entity that it had paid the money for. Where does that stand? What is the status of that investment? The 270 million as distinct from the guarantee, as to has this been written off? Where does it stand? What is happening with that? Is there any chance of recovery of any of that funding? And then in terms of the guarantee itself, how much of that guarantee was exercised, and therefore did the PIC have to stand behind that guarantee, and how much did that actually end up? Was it the full $100 million or less that was utilized? And where do we stand in relation to the investment as a whole? Has the PIC exited this investment with the license being taken by the Nigerian government? Or is it something that we now have an interaction between the PIC and the Nigerian government to try to resolve what may be salvaged or not in relation to this? So that's perhaps information that needs to be provided expeditiously with regard to this investment. But perhaps just a question, Mr. Chikuru, is the sense that you give a recommendation, you contribute to the decision, and you're ignored. In essence, that's what is the way I would understand this. You've said don't invest. You took a decision where you were before not to invest. You advise here that this is not a good investment. And in essence, it's proceeded with, and you are no longer in the loop about where it's proceeded or views heard from you. Would you know whether your views against the investment were ever presented to any structure of the PIC when taking the decision?
Unfortunately, Madam Commissioner, in this one, I do not know, because I was not, it being an investment in the listed side. One of the things that happened was that when we work in research, we mostly support the unlisted team. That's where we spend about 90% of the transactions. It will be in the unlisted side. So one will have to be invited to a PMC meeting on the listed side, which will be discussing this issue.
But given that this is a significant investment of a few billion rand, and given that it is in dollars and on the continent, I would have thought in terms of decision making, you would want all expertise around the table, irrespective of where they lie in the PIC. Yeah. You're taking a decision of that magnitude and that complexity of countries where we already know that the entity is technically and financially in great difficulty.
I agree.
So you were not invited, and you're not aware whether your views, the written views, were presented at all. There was no feedback to you or request for you for information or an opinion.
I agree,
in that
and
decision-making.
I would have expected to be invited, especially considering the industry experience I've had, and also by then my manager knew the quality of work that he had seen me do at Stanlip. So I would have expected to be invited to discuss my views on the investment, but that never happened.
Who signed off the guarantee?
Madam Commissioner, the only documents I've seen were the ones from the investment committee which said they are giving approval for the CEO to sign the legal agreements, but whether it was him or somebody or else acting at that point in time, I don't know. I've not seen.
But the investment committee mandated him to go ahead with a guarantee.
Correct, yeah.
Do you know if there was some kind of a relationship between Mr. Lawal, I think, who ran the company, and the PIC executives, say Dr. Machila or whatever?
No, I'm not aware of any.
I just want to remind you, Mr. Monahela, that what you placed on record is not evidence until we get those documents.
Yes. We'll place them before the Commission, Mr. Commissioner. We'll also place documents before the Commission that deals with the guarantee, the amount that was used by Aron, which I can say at the present moment that it was over 60 million US dollars. We will place documents that prove that amount. We'll also place documents before the Commission that show that attempts were made by the PIC to take over the operations, even after it became aware of the litigation between the three companies.
So if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that if the PIC wanted to take this over, it wanted to continue with that exploration, notwithstanding the evidence before it.
Yes.
And if it had to take that over, what was it willing to spend in addition to what it had already spent? Because it only had a 29% interest, so what would it have spent, or what would it willing to spend to take it all over?
Can I just speak to my colleague, Mr. Commissioner? Mr. Commissioner, we will provide the Commission with evidence on that issue.
So to summarize, are we saying that the first decision for the PIC to invest was not right, given the issues which held, and then the second one, which is even more critical, are you saying the guarantee wasn't supposed to be given? Is that what I'm hearing?
Mr. Commissioner, my first assessment of the investment was that we do not have sufficient information to make a good decision on it. And I was also not comfortable with the assumptions that they were using. So I think if I had to redo that over and putting on PIC's boots, I would have had to get a technical expert to look at it to understand, is this realistic? And when we look at the production, which we have seen in Annexure B, page 5 at the bottom, that the Oyo 7 and Oyo 8 wells, which were drilled, they did manage to get to 14,000 barrels per day, which is what management had indicated earlier in 2013. But the production collapsed quite quickly. It did not even match what you have seen before with the Oyo 5 and 6 wells. It was much more poor. And that confirmed my suspicion. The one part where I was probably proven wrong is that Aron came back and said we have found a discovery in the Miocene, which is the deeper formation using Oyo 7 well, and which I doubted because I thought E&I would have explored for that. In as much as I might have been proven wrong on that side, I still think my judgment was correct that this was a bad investment, because if that discovery was that significant, we shouldn't be talking about Aron being in bankruptcy if it was going to produce something similar to its neighbors from the Miocene. So the fact that they found something, it might be actually very tiny.
Just in terms of the balance sheet, when you were at Stanlip and also, people within the PIC, there was a lot of debt in the balance sheet. Did the PIC so know about that? And if so, how did the company say it was going to meet those debts? Because surely within a DD,
Yeah.
you find this and you go to ask the questions.
Mr. Commissioner, it will be my expectation that PIC did do a DD on the project. I don't know. I was not there. But the debt was out there for everybody to see. Even now, one can go and look at the stock exchange filings and can still find the records which were available at the time for anyone to see. So PIC had known about the debt that's on the books. How the discussion went at PIC, I don't know.
Just a broad question about the skills during that particular time. I mean, you are saying the PIC had great people, but probably on the petroleum side, they didn't have that. Do you think these are some of the problems where the PIC needs to get the best people within those sort of areas, or they can go and hire, technical people, from outside?
Mr. Commissioner, it's definitely PIC must have access to those skilled people, whether they are employed permanently or as a service provider. I don't see much difference between the two, but I think definitely before we make the decision to put money in an investment, we must make sure that we have the best research, that we have the latest know-how, and we understand the risk that we are taking. And in some ways, that is also the reason why the research and project development team was brought about, because its mission is to do that detailed research without the distraction of, I have a transaction that I need to close tomorrow or next month, but now the focus can be just deep dive into the energy sector, deep dive into agriculture, and understand what is out there without the other pressures.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Commissioner, I have no further questions for the witness.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chikudu.
Thank you.
I hope you'll understand that you might be called back again to clear up certain things if there are problems that we come across in the documentation that's still to be placed before us.
Okay.
I hope you'll be available.
I
So
understand.
far, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. And you are excused.
Thank you.
Mr. Commissioner, may I just request for a short adjournment to make way for the next witness and the evidence leader?
Is it necessary for a short adjournment, or is it just a change of chairs and we can sit and wait?
They are inside, Mr. Commissioner. Yes. We can just move away.
Anyway, I think let's take a 10-minute adjournment.
Rubina Solomon.
Spelled R-U-B-E-E-N-A.
Yes, Commissioner.
What with an S? Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
None.
Not.
Commissioner.
Do you swear then that the evidence you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth? Raise your right hand and say, so help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Thank you.
What is with all this? Oh, I see.
Yes, Solomon, not Solomons.
Without the S.
Yes.
Okay.
Mrs. Solomons, am I correct that you prepared a statement for this commission?
Yes, you are.
Can you please start at paragraph 1 of your statement?
I'm an adult female currently employed by the Public Investment Corporation as Executive Head Investment Management.
I think your mic is a bit far from you.
Is that better? Yeah. Thank you. I'm an adult female currently employed by the Public Investment Corporation as Executive Head Investment Management, currently overseeing the following divisions: portfolio management and valuations, investment operations, and environmental, social, and governance. I joined
I'm trying to keep up, but I can't.
Sorry.
Can you just slow down a little?
I joined the PIC as a credit risk manager in 2005 from the banking sector. I served in various roles during my tenure at the PIC, which included Chief Risk Officer, Senior Manager Financial Risk, General Manager Unlisted Operations, and General Manager Investment Management. I have obtained the following qualifications: Bachelor of Commerce Honours, Masters in Business Administration, Certificate in Corporate Governance, and a higher certificate in Islamic Finance, Banking, and Law. I have been requested...
Is there much difference between Islamic banking law and the country's banking laws?
The structure of the Islamic financing and the way in which the conventional banking is undertaking, there are differences, yes.
You may proceed.
Question, just another question. So within those three divisions, the PMV and the others, you know, how many staff do you have? Or what is your staff complement? Because those seems to be large divisions, isn't it? Do you remember?
I can provide the exact number to the Commission. The entire structure is not fully staffed. There are still vacancies and the recruiting is ongoing.
But roughly, what?
There's about 40.
40 people. All right. Okay, thank you.
I have been requested by the evidence leader of the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into allegations of impropriety regarding the PIC to submit a statement which provides highlights of the risk rating tool used in Isabaya by the Portfolio Management and Valuations team for unlisted investments. The role of the PMV team was previously explained by Mr. Kaya Sonke, Senior Manager PMV, during his appearance at this commission. The rating classification, the portfolio is disaggregated into 4 categories, namely performing investments, which are defined as investments that are performing in line with expectation, and that there are no observable signs of the investment being at risk. The second category is underperforming, defined as financial performance of the portfolio company is below expectation, and these investments usually require performance improvement initiatives to enhance revenues and/or margins and/or profitability. The third category is the watch list category. There are observable signs that the client's investment may be at risk if no action is taken to remedy such. Investments in this classification are companies that depict early stage of distress. This may include factors such as a decline in the financial performance, operational challenges, amongst other factors. The final category is distressed investments. There may be indications to doubt recoverability of an investment. There may be instances where watchlist and or distressed investments require intervention, such as an independent business review with the aim of restructuring or optimizing the business. The detailed rating criteria is attached in Annexure A. And if I may reference that now, the table in Annexure A.
And can you talk through it, please?
Will do.
The purpose of talking through that, I mean, because it's a list of what you would look at in terms of underperforming, watch list, and distressed. I'm not sure that it would help to go through each one of those.
Okay, thank you. If I were to move on then to Annexure B, this provides a graphical illustration of the portfolio composition and the rating trends over the last 5 reporting periods. If I may just talk you through just key points on it. On slide 3, the portfolio risk rating illustrations were done as at 31st of December 2018. Ratings are done on a quarterly basis. There is a level of fluidity because it gets done every quarter. One would really look at the triggers and assess the portfolio accordingly. The top right-hand graph, the graph on the top left-hand side reflects the investment performance of the total Isabaya portfolio. The graph beneath that reflects the same portfolio, the investment performance, excluding one significantly large legacy investment, which comprises an estimated 61% of the total distressed portfolio. The top right-hand side graph provides an overview of the total invested capital up to date as of 31st of December, the quantum of those investments that were performing, and it breaks down the underperforming watch list and distressed investments.
So what is the dark green versus the light green in the dots there? So you got the 45 billion,
yes,
and you got a light green and a dark green. What's that?
There's no specific reference to the light green shading in the background. So it's just the green bar, 45 billion is the actual quantum that we would look at.
And in the distress is 24 billion. The AfriSem is how much there?
The 61% of that amount on slide 4.
Okay,
The,
you got it somewhere. Yeah.
Yes, the next page,
Okay.
slide 4,
All right.
breaks down the top 10 investments per risk rating classification. And we can see AfriSem is sitting at 13.5 billion rand, which equates to 61% of the total amount of distressed investments.
Yes, I get that.
On slide 5, it provides the portfolio rating trend over the last 5 quarters.
I'll just go back to that for a second in terms of distress, because if you looked at your top 10 distress, there are a number that have appeared in relation to this inquiry. It would be independent media is 4% of total distress, that's 888 million rand. And Sacom Noto is 2% at 543 million rand. At VBS at 2% is 450 million. Is that correct?
Yes.
So 3 of the 10 entities have been part of this inquiry so far.
Yes.
I think it's 4 because it's 4 the last one, the Mozambique one, the SNS.
SNS as well, yes.
SNS Equity,
Yes.
okay, that's the Mozambican one, which is again 402
Yes.
million
which is
rand.
4.
Okay, so it's 4.
So, yes, it's 4 from the 10. Yes.
On slide 5, if I may, it reflects the portfolio rating trend. The primary axis on the left-hand side reflects the rand amounts and the quantum of investments from the period December 2017. And with new approvals and disbursements, this figure has grown to 80 billion in December 2018. The secondary axis is in percentage, which shows the distribution of the portfolio between the 4 rating categories. The other annexure that has been provided...
Before you move on from that, I think this, in a sense, this portfolio rating trend is actually quite, how much attention do you pay to that? Because that would indicate, as you've said already, a quite significant deterioration over this period from 69 billion to 80 billion. And if that trend continues, because we're now into 2019, do you have any idea to what degree the first 4 or 5 months of this year have shown in terms of that portfolio trend? Has it improved? Has it deteriorated? What do you assess in that regard?
If I may just correct something, ma'am, through you, Commissioner, the 69 million is the approved investments, and it is increased to 80 billion, is what was approved.
Okay, so the investment has increased?
Yes, has increased by 20 billion from December 2017 to December 2018.
And what percentage of that is non-performing? And would that be the percentage that if we went back to your previous graph, your top 10?
Yes, ma'am.
So that would be, what is the percentage of that given that AfriSam is so big?
If we include AfriSam, then it's 29%.
And if you added the watch list to that?
The watch list on its own is 10%.
So basically 39% would be watch list or distressed?
Yes.
And what has that been? Is that a declining trend or an increasing trend, an improving trend or a worsening trend?
Over the 5 periods, it has been an increasing trend. There have been various factors that have contributed to it. Some have been at a macro level in terms of agriculture, so the value chain would have been impacted, construction, but a lot of them also would be specifically nuanced to the individual investments.
And to what or how quickly, or what is the rate by which, if you took underperforming, because I mean your performing is sort of your green code, but if you took underperforming, underperforming does not necessarily move to watch list. It could be underperforming with intervention to move it into a performing entity.
Yes, correct.
What is the percentage generally that would move from watch list to underperforming or distress? Do you have some sense that on average it's 50-50 that moves into performing, or do you have some trend that would indicate how risky your underperforming is to get into a more difficult position?
I can provide that statistics to the Commission, ma'am.
Just a question. So, just in terms of the trends with this performance sort of going down, what could be the key contributors? I mean, we know the economy is very weak, but what could be key contributors to this underperformance?
I wouldn't want to single out any 1 or 2 specific contributors. There have been a vagary of reasons and contributors to it. Some of it could be the macro factors, some it could be a matter of structuring of the investment, overall financial performance of the entity.
Sorry, somehow I can't hear you. Just get closer. Yeah, and just like start again, please. Yeah, start again.
There are various contributors to the distressed investments. Some of it are macro factors. A lot of it has to do with the underlying businesses in terms of financial distress that they might find themselves in, operating performance not being where it should be. And sometimes we also have to relook at or revisit the strategy if it is implemented or requires alignment as it was initially, as was when we initially bought into the business or invested in the company.
If we went back to Annexure B, I think that probably does give you the split. If you looked at the last column at December 18, it would be, if you looked at your green line, which is performing, is roughly 60%.
Yes.
And therefore the combination of distressed, underperforming, and watch list would be 40%.
40%, yes. Okay.
Do you know much about what is happening to AfriSam? AfriSam, what is the current status? What has been happening in the past few years?
So, AfriSam, I can provide the detailed reports. AfriSam was initially invested in during 2008, 2009. The global financial crisis happened. There was a write-down on the investment subsequent to that. There was then initiatives to remedy the transaction. A BEE partner was brought in, and the investment has ticked along, but I'll gladly provide all the documentation to the committee.
Okay.
There is an additional annexure that has been provided to the Commission. It's a detailed investment schedule which shows every single investment as well as the risk rating indication as at 31 December. I'll gladly furnish all underlying reports that informs these ratings to the Commission if required.
Just another quick one, you know, when you say performing, I'm just trying to find the ones that are really, really performing, you know, the ones which are like shooting the lights out, you know, basically. Do you have that category, or, you know, or this isn't something you guys want to do, you know?
We do have, so performing is basically categorized as or the performance is in line with expectation. If we were to look at the broadish, the Excel spreadsheet that provides the detail, there are quite a few investments that are categorized as performing. And on slide 4, the top 10 performing, the first graph on the left-hand side gives you the top 10 performers in the portfolio.
Oh, okay, all right. These are the top 10, and if I want to see the, you know, the kind of returns which they are generating, where will
we can provide the IRR returns, the financial performance returns as well. That has not been submitted as part of this submission.
Yes, please do, please do.
Will do.
Please do.
Just want to find out the frequency of reporting. Do you think it's sufficient?
The reporting currently happens on a quarterly basis. There is a quarterly lag because we allow for investee companies to provide financial information on average 45 days after reporting month end. Reporting has always been quarterly. There is a need, however, for this to be increased, and to that end, we now have the portfolio management committees actually are focusing on distressed and watchlist investments on a monthly basis at every portfolio sitting.
And these reports, do you also provide them to the clients?
Yes, these reports, once it has gone through the internal committees, it then informs the reporting that goes through to the PIC clients on a quarterly basis.
I just want to come back to this question of trend and how closely you watch that, because elsewhere in what would have been Mr. Zonke's presentation, he says the performing portion has declined from 66% in December 2017 to 56% in December 2018. And the distressed portion has increased from 25% to 31% in the same period. To what degree do you then look at, first of all, a 10% decline in 1 year is quite significant. How do you deal with that? What efforts do you make? Does your monitoring look at the detail of that in terms of both the risk to the PIC and to the investment in that entity, and what it would take, not just a funding issue, but what it would take to move them from distressed to better performance or watch list or underperforming, or to move them out of the distressed, because I'm assuming distressed can end up being a complete failure.
Yes.
What measures do you have in place? How big is your team? What effort does that include? Because I would have thought a 10% decline is pretty significant, and a distressed portion of that at 6% is quite significant.
I agree with you, Commissioner. It has been a significant decline. With regard to the process, the portfolio management teams would then, these things get reported, they are consulted with, and they meet with the deal teams as well. We then look at the contributing factors and the rationale for the underperformance, or try to unpack the reasons for it. Where required, we then these get reported at portfolio management committee. We also then suggest, with regard to appointing independent service providers, to actually give us an independent assessment in terms of what potential remedial stances that there may be. These are then presented back at Portfolio Management Committee, and along with the respective teams, look at the possible or the best alternatives to remedy and turn the business around to start getting it to perform again.
What's your success rate?
To date, the only one, so the trend has been, the trend has deteriorated over the last 5 reporting periods. A lot of these are still in the process of independent business review. There has been, Daybreak has been a successful turnaround strategy, but most of them are still underway in terms of turning the business around. I am happy to provide the committee with the reports on the respective distressed investments and the plans around those.
Just another question. When these companies are not performing, who takes the sort of, who carries the can, you know, finally, you know, for these things?
Well, the deal team never give up the ownership of the deal. They bring a specific investment to the PIC. We buy into a specific investment with a targeted return. They never step away from it. Ownership remains with them right through to exit.
And then do you have a time where somebody comes or the CEO comes and say, deal team, you had 2 transactions, 4 transactions, they have failed, and, you know, just explain, you know?
So at the Portfolio Management Committees, where these reports would serve on a quarterly basis, the deal owners have to present the deals along with the portfolio management teams in terms of the contributing factors and the way forward in terms of how we are remedying it.
Do you get people fired for these things, or people just invest and if it didn't work out, it didn't, you know, and that's it, and life continues?
To date, I'm not aware of anyone being fired for it.
So meaning these structures are not working well, sort of in some sense, maybe?
Yes, maybe. Yes.
Yeah, because in some companies, you know, you own a transaction, and if it doesn't work, I mean, you are in trouble.
Yes. Yes, through your commissioner, so that would then be that would form part of the remuneration cycle and
Yes.
the HR cycle, as well as the performance contracting that each employee is subjected to and has to abide by.
Yeah. People should own these transactions, and if they do not do well, stuff about bonuses, we know we need to have a look at them, isn't it?
Yes, I concur.
Concur? Yeah?
Concur.
All right.
I just go back to this underperforming, because if one looks at the schedule that you've provided, what, I don't say it's with everything, but it does seem to be with quite a number. If you look at let's take some that have been before this commission. The one that was here a short while ago, which was, sorry, these things are upside down. Well, let's take Vendor Building Society for example. Right, you've got facility, revolving facility, facility 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all for building society, for Vendor Building Society. Right? This is a cumulative, it's not one-off. It's multi-investment in the same entity.
Yes.
If you take, say, independent media, you'll find it is 1, 2, 3, 4 of the same thing. So you have a cumulative additional investment. If you take Machai, which was here a couple of weeks ago, you've actually got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on that, because I think one's at the bottom of another page. So it seems to me, unless I'm reading this incorrectly, because it looks like he has a senior loan, there's another loan, there's another loan, there's a mezzanine. Well, that's a slight different one, because this one, as I said, these are upside down. But what it indicates is there isn't a cumulative risk profile. PIC seems to be making an investment on top of another investment, on top of another investment, and when it goes sour, you've got different investments of different amounts that are now in distress. how does the cumulative risk assessment for the next investment take place?
So, through you, Commissioner. So this spreadsheet reflects it per instrument, per investee company. The appraisal document would give a cumulative position of the entire exposure to the investee company if there were to be if there were to be a follow-on any additional request. The committee would look at the total exposure to the investee company.
But make an investment nevertheless.
Depending on the merits, yes.
But you can see this in the distress.
Yes.
Right, that it is notwithstanding, there seems to be the next investment. Okay.
Just a question, and to just raise an issue and tell me if I'm sort of right or wrong. Deal teams should own transactions, deal teams, all right? And this issue has been spoken about quite a lot. The minute you make decisions by the CEO or committees, you're going to have problems, isn't it? Because within a committee, you cannot hold people accountable. So, isn't it better for deal teams to own transactions, whether it's in one sector, property, or whatever, and they would sort of live and die by those decisions, and committees and management don't become part of that. In that way, then you can determine the bonuses and all this depending on the performance of these companies.
I would think in terms of, you would need to have, any company would have to have some sort of governance structure and an operating framework, be it your DOA, that would govern how and when and the quantums by which investments would then be made. Even if it is made by a committee, doesn't necessarily mean that deal makers are not going to be held to account. Does that process require refinement and enhancement? Yes, I think it does.
Can I just ask you, with a failed investment transaction where the PIC has invested and the investment fails, is there any kind of review within the PIC to check whether there was a problem or something omitted or missed in the process towards the decision to invest?
So as part of the portfolio management, the PMV team's duties is to undertake a lessons learned diagnosis of what went wrong and to share those learnings going forward in future deals when those are contemplated.
And if it were to be found, for instance, that the problem was with the due diligence team or risk or whatever, does that ever happen?
So what they would look at is the lessons in terms of where it has gone wrong. In terms of if it requires a process refinement, the deal process or the overall investment process would then be fine-tuned. But if you are asking me about the level of accountability and if certain individuals have been held to account, then my response to that is no. That is an area for an enhancement.
Basically, this is collective responsibility, and I think we know that thing doesn't work really. Collective responsibility, we have seen it on the political field and all that. Correct? No?
Yes.
Hmm? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
See, I don't want to belabor the point, but if I took something like on your list, Smile Telecoms, okay, investment in March, which is an equity investment, and that, if I understand, its market value was round figure 645 million. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
So then, if we turn the page over, and you look at again Smile Telecoms, it's a convertible, which is a loan. Is that for an additional 400 million?
Yes. So
it's an additional 400 million a few months later. And then there's a further loan in November 2018 of 83 million. Is that correct?
It's correct. It would also depend on sometimes during the investment tenure, there might be additional requests, or there might be waivers or consents that would be required from the PMs, from the committees for consideration.
Sure. All I'm saying is that there's a distress in already 2015, and in 2018, there's still further facility granted. Now, it may be something, there's a workout program, which is not indicated here, to actually say, how do we work either out of this or get it back into a performing? But I'm just saying, over a period of 3 years, it goes over R1 billion by quite a bit, and there's further investments. At what point in time? Because one assumes, because I don't know when I mean, if you looked at it, your distress is in March 2015, and your further loan is in November 2018, and it is 1.2 billion rand that is now in distress. So the question I'm really asking is, given the challenge of moving distressed back, you don't want to lose the investment, you want to move it back into performing. 3 years is a long time to be in distress.
Yes, it is. There are initiatives underway in terms of closer monitoring of SMILE and to try and work out, because it was a co-investment. The other lenders has also undertaken a business review. So yes, it is a long time. There were initiatives during that time. I concur that there are other instruments subsequent to the initial identification. If the committee would like, I can provide the underlying reports that specifically detail.
No, I don't think so. It's really just a question of what proactive role the PIC plays in trying to ensure that distress moves back, and you don't get deeper into the hole all the time.
So through that, once it's identified, we would then get independent business reviews from service providers to give us an assessment, and to then look at what meaningful measures we can actually put in and implement to start turning the business around.
Are you done, Ms. Kuwe?
I'm done, Commissioner. I have no further questions for Ms. Solomons.
Yes. Thank you very much, Ms. Solomon.
Thank you,
Thanks for your contribution. I hope you will be available if and when you are required to come back to clear up certain things.
Certainly, Commissioner.
Otherwise, thank you so much for your contribution, and you're excused.
Thank you.
I suppose that concludes the business for today, Commissioner.
Why do you say you suppose?
I thought my evidence leader would be here to tell whether...
Oh, there he is. He's just walked in. All right, so we understood that there would be these witnesses. I think that then will be the end of the day. We'll adjourn until tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Thank you.